Welcome back to the Books Bible Study. We are continuing in Genesis chapter 41. It's not too late to catch up if you're just starting with us. So get your pen and paper or whatever you take notes on. Hopefully, you're writing some good notes, some good thoughts, and some good questions. So, Genesis chapter 41, verse 1. Then it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh had a dream. And behold, he stood by the river. Verse 2. Suddenly there came up out of the river 7 cows, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. So we are paying attention once again to the numbers, the amount of something, the person, the location, right? What is happening? What are they doing? Can anybody guess what the 7 cows mean? Okay. What about them coming up out of the river and feeding in the meadow? If they are fine and they're fat, what do you think that means? I want you to think about that, right? Verse 3. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them out of the river, ugly and gaunt, and stood by the other cows on the bank of the river. So you have 7 fat cows, right? And 7 gaunt ones. It doesn't say that the gaunt ones started eating from the meadow. Okay? Verse 4. And the ugly and gaunt cows ate up the 7 fine-looking and fat cows. So Pharaoh awoke. Verse 5. He slept and dreamed a second time. And suddenly 7 heads of grain came up on one stalk, plump and good. Verse 6. Then behold, 7 thin heads, blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. Verse 7. And the 7 thin heads devoured the 7 plump and full heads. So Pharaoh awoke, and indeed it was a dream. So we see the same action, right, happening in each dream. The thin is eating the fat, except one was cows and the other was grain. Okay, so you see the same action happening using different things. Verse 8 says, Now it came to pass in the morning that his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all his wise men. And Pharaoh took them his dreams, but there was no one who could interpret them for Pharaoh. So these magicians were counterfeits to God's wisdom, right? Only God can give specific and complete insight to the future. These other magicians, soothsayers, witches, warlocks, they can only give you partial, right? But they don't see all and know all, right? Verse 9. Then the chief butler spoke to Pharaoh, saying, I remember my faults this day. Verse 10. When Pharaoh was angry with his servants and put me in custody in the house of the captain of the guard, both me and the chief baker. Verse 11. We each had a dream in one night, he and I. Each of us dreamed according to the interpretation of his own dream. Verse 12. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there, a servant of the captain of the guard. And we told him, and he interpreted our dreams for us. To each man he interpreted according to his own dream. Verse 13. And it came to pass, just as he interpreted for us, so it happened. He restored me to my office, and he hanged him. So now he remembers Joseph, right? He was supposed to tell him immediately, but I guess he forgot, okay? Verse 14. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of the dungeon, and he shaved, changed his clothing, and came to Pharaoh. Verse 15. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, I have had a dream, and there is no one who can interpret it. But I have heard it said of you that you can understand a dream to interpret it. So how many of you know that God will put you in a place where only you could do the thing that needs to be done? Right? Verse 16. So Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace. Verse 17. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, Behold, in my dream I stood on the bank of a river. Verse 18. Suddenly 7 cows came up out of the river, fine looking and fat, and they fed in the meadow. Verse 19. Then behold, 7 other cows came up after them, poor and very ugly and gaunt, such ugliness as I have never seen in all the land of Egypt. Verse 20. And the gaunt and ugly cows ate up the first 7, the fat cows. Verse 21. When they had eaten them up, no one would have known that they had eaten them, for they were just as ugly as at the beginning. So I awoke. Verse 22. Also I saw in my dream, and suddenly 7 heads came up on one stalk, full and good. Verse 23. Then behold, 7 heads, withered, thin, and blighted by the east wind, sprang up after them. Verse 24. And the thin heads devoured the 7 good heads. So I told this to the magicians, but there was no one who could explain it to me. Verse 25. Then Joseph said to Pharaoh, the dreams of Pharaoh are one. God has shown Pharaoh what he is about to do. Verse 26. The 7 good cows are 7 years. Okay, so we see the amount of things can also equal time, right? It could be months, days, years. Okay. So the 7 good cows are 7 years, and the 7 good heads are 7 years. The dreams are 1. Verse 27. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years. And the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. Right? So we see first an animal in the first dream doing the same thing. And then we see grain doing the same thing. Right? So that means famine. 28. This is the thing which I have spoken to Pharaoh. God has shown Pharaoh what he's about to do. Verse 29. Indeed, 7 years of great plenty will come throughout all the land of Egypt. Verse 30. But after them, 7 years of famine will arise, and all the plenty will be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine will deplete the land. So there's a real fear of famine, right? And I wonder what in particular caused this famine in Egypt, okay? And I wonder if we'll find that answer. So I wonder what caused this particular famine. Now, we know they worship other gods and things like that, so I'm wondering if that has something to do with it, or is it just God putting Joseph in position, okay? Verse 31. So the plenty will not be known in the land because of the famine following, for it will be very severe. Verse 32. And the dream was repeated to Pharaoh twice because the thing is established by God, and God will surely bring it to pass. So when God speaks twice, whether it's a dream, a vision, through a word of one of his ministers, whatever, it is already established. It is going to happen. Okay? And this says God will shortly bring it to pass. Verse 33. So this is how you know this is not like a warning. Because in a warning, he will tell you, like, this will happen if you don't do X, Y, Z, right? Or if you do this. But this is something that is already established is going to happen, okay? Verse 33. Now, therefore, let Pharaoh select a discerning and wise man and set him over the land of Egypt. Verse 34. Let Pharaoh do this and let him appoint officers over the land to collect 1/5 of the produce of the land of Egypt in the 7 plentiful years. So now this is the wisdom of God telling him what to do about it. Okay, so it's going to happen. So now this is the wisdom of God telling Joseph to tell Pharaoh what to do about it. Verse 35. And let them gather all the food of those good years that are coming and store up grain under the authority of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities. Verse 36. Then that food shall be as a reserve for the land for the 7 years of famine, which shall be in the land of Egypt, that the land may not perish during the famine. Verse 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of all his servants. Verse 38. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this? A man in whom is the Spirit of God. So he ain't looking for the magicians no more. Right? So sometimes God will put you in a place where only you can do a thing so that he can be glorified. Okay? So we continue just during these first 41 chapters, we see that wicked people, people that don't fear God, use people of God, right? When it benefits them, and they have no intention of giving up their other gods, right? And this is happening today, right? People use people that they know God has favor on their life, and they have no intention of turning to God. Some might, right? Some might, but most of the time they just want the benefit of God, right? They don't actually want to worship God, because to worship God, there is a certain standard that we have to live by to remain under his favor, under his care, okay? Verse 39. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and as wise as you. So they recognize the gift, the talent, what God has placed on the inside of you, right? Verse 40. You shall, this is Pharaoh talking to Joseph. He says, you shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. Okay? So he's ruling over all of Egypt except for matters of the throne, right? Verse 41. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. Verse 42. Then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand, and he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. Verse 43. And he had him ride in the second chariot which he had, and they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. Okay, so Joseph once again placed in a position of authority and power. And so I just want you to recognize that no matter where you are, even while he was in prison, right? No matter where you are placed, just like Joseph, you will be what God intended for you to be, okay? Are you being what God intended for you to be where you are? Or are you so focused about complaining about the place you are that you're not doing what you were created to do, right? Verse 44. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. Verse 45. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphenath Paneah. Okay? Zaphenath Paneah. And he gave him as wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. So now Joseph is really a part of them now. He receives the Egyptian name. Okay? Marries an Egyptian woman whose father is a priest of the city where the famous temple of Ra, their sun god, is. Okay? So now Joseph has married into the pagans. Okay? Verse 46. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. 47. Now in the 7 plentiful years the ground brought forth abundantly. Okay? 48. So he gathered up all the food of the 7 years which were in the land of Egypt and laid up the food in cities. He laid up in every city the foods of the fields which surrounded them. 49. Joseph gathered very much grain as the sand of the sea until he stopped counting. So it was very abundant years, okay? For it was immeasurable. Verse 50. And to Joseph were born 2 sons before the years of the famine came, whom Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bore to him. Verse 51. Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God has made me forget all my toil and all my father's house. Verse 52. And the name of the second he called Ephraim, for God has caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. Verse 53. So we see he went from being in prison, but over all the prisoners, right, to being over all of Egypt. Just like that. And in one act of obedience, of listening to God, interpret this king's dream, this Pharaoh's dream, right? One moment to the next moment. He went from being in a dungeon to being in the palace, being over all of Egypt, and having all the power and all authority except for the throne. Do y'all see how quickly that happened? So while you're thinking that a situation may always be this way, in one moment of obedience, right? And sometimes you are waiting on other people, right? So he was waiting on the guy to remember him, okay? But there had to be an opportunity, right? So there had to be a dream that could not be interpreted by the magicians in order for Joseph to come forth, okay? So, verse 54. And the 7 years of famine began to come, as Joseph had said. The famine was in all lands, but in all the land of Egypt there was bread. So again, the righteous will always be planted somewhere, right? So even in the midst of famine, plague, etc., it won't affect the place where the righteous is, because they would have had the wisdom of God, or they would have been told to move, right? So when you see the righteous move, if you ain't so sure you righteous, you might want to get out of there. Okay, so when the righteous is planted somewhere, even in the midst of famine, plague, whatever it is, it will not be affected. Okay, that's why it's good to pray for your nation, to pray for your community. Okay, that hey, let it be at least 10 righteous where I'm at, right? Or if it's just me, let me remain righteous so it won't be destroyed. Okay, verse 55. So when all the land of Egypt was famished, the people cried to Pharaoh for bread. Then Pharaoh said to all the Egyptians, go to Joseph. Okay, whatever he says to you, do. Verse 56. The famine was over all the face of the earth, and Joseph opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians. And the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. Verse 57. So all countries came to Joseph in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all the lands, right? But remember about Joseph. He held his integrity. No matter how many times that woman tempted him and came after him day after day after day, he held his integrity. And so what happens is you may be called and positioned by God, but you fall for the temptation, right? You can't have a certain level of power if you're willing to fold under pressure and you're willing to fold into temptation. It doesn't matter where you are, who you think is watching or not watching. You keep your integrity, okay? For positions of power like the one Joseph had, you had to have integrity. You had to be trustworthy. You have to be trusted by God. So no lying, no stealing, no cheating, no bearing false witness, right? Wherever you are, whether you're in the pit or the dungeon, definitely not while you're in position of power. And you see a lot of righteous people fall because as they elevate, as they gain influence, as they gain power, their integrity starts to slip, right? And you see a hard fall. So if you have this type of leadership, of this type of wisdom, this type of anointing, this type of influence, hold on to your integrity, okay? Because that's what happens for you, right? You go from a dungeon to a palace, right? You still have a position of authority and power that's just on you, okay? No matter where you are, it's just on you. But when you have integrity and you maintain your integrity, that's how quickly it can happen for you, right? Because God can trust you. God trusted him with all of Egypt, okay? Because he was going to obey. He was going to do the will of God, right? So let that be a lesson to you all. You can't pray for favor, for influence on all that, and you can't be trusted. Not by people, by God, which means the stuff that nobody sees, okay? God has to trust you, right? And so we will continue with chapter 42. Stay tuned.